Clytus, I'm bored. What plaything can you offer me today?
An obscure body in the SK system, Your Majesty. The inhabitants refer to it as
The Ron Pertee Show.
He's directed Saw 2, 3, and 4. He's the driving force behind Repo the Genetic Opera, the Mother's Day remake, The Barons, 11/11. Plus, he's the reason countless folks can't sleep at night. And he's here today. He's joining me to talk about his new film, St. Agatha. Darren Lynn Bousman, thank you so much for coming on the Ron Pertee Show.
With an introduction like that, you kind of set the bar high. I hope I don't underwhelm everyone listening.
I don't think you will. I mean, considering they're listening to this show,
all right.
I think you'll be okay. When I watched St. Agatha, I try to not watch trailers before I go in because I don't want, and because with the new Pet Sematary trailer that just dropped today where it gave away everything, I try not to worry. I don't want to have to worry about that stuff. So I went in kind of blind with St. Agatha, and I will be honest, as I'm going through it, I'm thinking, wow, this is like a cool Exorcist Suspiria mix type thing. And then when it really ramps up, you're like, wow, that was quite the turn.
Yeah, I think that, a lot of people assumed it would be a supernatural horror take. A funny story I've never told anywhere. You're getting an exclusive story right now.
Woohoo!
There actually was a monster in the movie originally that I cut out. Not a real monster. Basically, very early on when we were shooting, we had Mary, who's played by Sabrina Kern, basically falling under tortures of this convent. And she begins to lose her mind. And one of the things that we did is when she was losing her mind, she saw this demonic thing. And it was under her bed. It was in a closet. And there's one scene of it that's terrifying and actually very cool. And then there were 3 scenes that were laughably bad. So we cut the monster out completely. And we made it just be a drama, basically. A drama that's really fucked up and dark and sinister and vile. But I think that was a smart decision because I think it is one thing that separates St. Agatha from a lot of the other nun movies that you see out there, is that it's completely real. It's not some overly complicated supernatural tale. It's stories of con women going against each other.
Yeah, which is great. And I remember I heard you earlier, and you were talking about the one little exploitative bit at the very end, which I saw coming, but it was great. The payoff was amazing. But so that's a good thing. Yes. And this is the second film this year for me that has been completely twisted around in my head because with this one and then The Man Who Killed Hitler and then the Bigfoot. You go into that thinking you're getting full exploitation, and then you get what you get. Same thing with this. You think it's going to be the supernatural movie, and then when you finally get the payoff, it's amazing, and you feel way more grounded, and it's a fantastic picture.
Well, I think a lot of that also had to do with Carolyn Hennessy, who plays Mother Superior. All the actors, Courtney Halvorsen, Lindsay Cyan, they're these great female actors that we had, and they ground it in such reality. It's so subtle, their reactions to things. And so there's a scene very early on where Courtney's character, Catherine, is forced to eat something really unpleasant. And there's a million ways she could have played that, over the top, big, grandiose. And it's so subtle. And the reactions between Hannah Fierman and Sabrina Kern and everyone watching this was so subtle. And I loved that. I loved it. And I think that they elevated the material. When you elevate the material like that, and you add Carolyn Hennessy, you have you can't then all of a sudden betray all that and have some ridiculous demonic force coming in. So we kept it. We kept it grounded as much as possible.
I know the one thing that wasn't the sequence that made me sick to my stomach. It was Mary in the coffin. What they do to her.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that I don't. There's so much stuff I don't want to spoil. But that one made me kind of like I had to look away for a little bit. Like, wow, okay. Now I know you said going into this, you kind of went into this with like a PG mindset, and the effects kind of made it the R. Are you trying to kind of go away from the more gory horror that you've done in the past?
Oh no, I mean that was half joking about the PG. No, I just think I'm a different. I'm sorry, I've got a cold.
No,
I think
fine.
I'm a different filmmaker than I was, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Where before the driving force of the things I shot was torture and porn, or the torture porn, like they called it. But it was the gimmicks. It was the splitting rib cages and twisting people till they broke. And characters took a second, a back seat to it all. Where now it's the reverse. Characters have to be in the front, the driving force of the vehicle, and the gore and the torture and the violence and the gimmicks, they have to be in the back. And I think to me that makes them more horrific. So it's just as I've grown up, I've kind of changed my approach on how I do and tell stories.
Well, I think that's the best thing for all filmmakers is to do that. You can't just be stagnant into one kind of thing. Yeah. Now, when it came to what drew you to this picture? Because I know it had 4 writers on the project.
Yeah. So that okay. That's a weird one. So when I originally got the script, it was the 3 original writers, Sarah, Andrew, and Sean, and they had a much different version of the script. A really different tone and feel to it. And Darren Bousman of 2008 would have made that movie in a second. It was vicious, it was violent, and it was just very demented. When I got a hold of it, 2 things responded to me of what they'd written, and it was Mother Superior, and it was this character of Agatha or Mary. And I said that I wanted to take those 2 things and make them the driving force and put everything else, like I said, in the back seat. So I brought in a writer friend of mine named Clint Sears, who I've worked with a ton. And Clint and I kind of restructured it and gave it more of a grounded approach and more something to what I consider to be my style and sensibilities. So Clint and I spent about 2 or 3 weeks just reapproaching the characters and taking what they had originally conceived of and just giving it a more real approach. And that's how that whole thing worked.
It's like, I love when horror is grounded in reality, and you did a great job of doing that. Now, if we can go back just a little bit, to the Mother's Day remake, I want to ask you something about that real quick.
Yeah.
I'm a big Troma fan, and I have all of Lloyd's How to Direct movie DVDs, which is like, oh, is this really how you do it? But okay, yeah. Now with the Mother's Day remake, was that something that you really felt passionate about from the word go, or was it something that you had to be kind of asked and prodded to get going?
No, Mother's Day is a completely unique story. I was attached to a different project at the time, and this project was called Wichita, which it was one of the most vicious scripts I'd ever read, and it was. I can't even tell you how intense and dark and fucked up it was, but I loved it, and it was something that I was dying to make. Everyone was scared to touch it. No one wanted to make this movie. Weinstein at the time bought it for me to make, and then they said halfway through, thinking about it, we're not doing this. We can't do this movie. So I had this script in my back pocket, and I got a phone call from Brett Ratner one afternoon saying that he had the rights to Mother's Day and would I be willing to meet with him on it. So Brett and I started talking, and he didn't have a take on the story. He loved the original film, as did I. I'm a huge fan of Troma, and I'm a huge fan of the original Mother's Day. But my problem with it was, how can you remake Mother's Day? It was a product of its time, and every movie that came out after Mother's Day of that type borrowed from it. The Hillbillies in the Woods, the Doing Things for the Horrific Mother, the Damsels in the... There was so much borrowed from it that I didn't know how to redo it in a cool and clever way. So I was talking to Brett about elements of Wichita that I liked. And Wichita had a lot of similar things. Crazy Brothers, blah, blah, blah. There was a lot of similarities. And so Brett said, why don't we take elements of Wichita and make it Mother's Day? So Scott Milam, the writer, and myself went back and we rewrote Wichita to become Mother's Day. And we represented it to Brett. And Brett was like, I love it. Let's do it. And then my next thing was, and I have this with any movie that I do, that people ask me to do this remake, but I said I will not do it unless I get sign off from the original creators. Because the last thing I want to do is upset Charles Kaufman or Lloyd Kaufman. And if the original creators aren't on board for this idea, it's going to fail. Audiences aren't going to embrace it.
Right.
So I met with Lloyd and Charles, and I told him my idea, and I said I want to adhere to the original as much as possible. And if you go back and watch my version of Mother's Day, there are direct lines, many paragraphs of lines taken from the original film and put into this, but done in a completely different manner, making it more serious, making it more grounded, putting it realism behind it. So we still talk about Queenie, we still talk about disco and punk, we still do all of these things, but it's just much more grounded.
Right.
And luckily, Lloyd and Charles loved that idea. And the last thing I want to do is to try to do the same version of a movie they already did.
Right.
Well, there's no fun in that. Go watch the original movie. So I wanted to have it have a completely different feel, and I think that we succeeded. And that's one of my favorite movies that I've done.
It's a favorite of mine too. I'm a big fan, and now with the Toxic Avenger getting remade, if somebody asked you if you wanted to do that, would you jump at it?
No, that's a harder one because Toxic Avenger there's been numerous Toxic Avengers, and that has such a cult following. Luckily, with Mother's Day, the cult following around Mother's Day was around trauma, not necessarily Mother's Day itself.
Right.
Toxic Avenger is around Toxic Avenger. People love that character. So that would be a harder one for me to do.
It's going to be I don't know. I'm torn on it. I'm not sure where to stand with it, but I just like the original so much. But now
I know, I agree.
When you set out to make St. Agatha, let's go back to that. Did you purposely want to make people hate nuns more?
No. In fact, Clint, who's a devout Catholic, it was very important to him that we gave audiences an out to not wanting them to hate nuns if they didn't want to. And he did something kind of smart that I disagreed with in the beginning, but now I look at it and I think it was really cool. If you watch the movie again and you listen to what they said, they're not real nuns, and that's not a real convent. Big spoiler. I mean, they are. I'm going to explain. These women are con women. They're all grifters. Now, they might have been nuns at one point in their life. They might have had a convent. But at this point now, they're operating on their own. I mean, one of the first things the Mother Superior says is, the Vatican turned its back and closed the purse strings. So they're operating on their own level. And so when the minute you allowed that sentence to exist in the movie, it gives you an out to say they're not adhering to any rules or regulations. They're doing their own thing.
Right.
So there's that. That said, I'm a huge religious fanatic when it comes to religious storytelling. All of my movies have some religious undertone in it, from The Barons to 11/11 to Devil's Carnival to this. Everything I do has some religious connotations. I'm fascinated by it. So I just think it's amazing because we all believe in these different things, and we have powerful beliefs in these different things.
Oh yeah, and I remember when I was watching it, my hands started to hurt at some point when I saw what they were doing to these girls. I'm like, wow, that reminds me of Catholic school, and my knuckles started to hurt.
Oh
yeah, so that was a good
Yeah,
thing.
Sarah Michaels, who was one of the film's producers and writers, she told us horror stories about Catholic school, and it's just like you don't believe some of this is real, but start researching and just Google. All you have to do is Google forced adoption convent, and you'll realize this is a real thing. I didn't make this up. This isn't some great, this isn't some insane story. This is real. Like what we're talking about really happened. Now we exaggerated it. I'm not saying that they killed all the postulants and whatever, but back in the 40s and 50s, there's numerous cases where this happened, where women were forced into adoption by the convent after the nuns convinced them that, hey, you can't take care of this kid. And I think to me that's something else that people need to remember, that while we exaggerated what happened, it did happen.
Yeah, that's some crazy stuff. And I know we're running out of time here, so I just want to tell everybody that you can get the St. Agatha on VOD starting on the 8th, which is tomorrow, and it's going to be in select theaters, right?
Yes, it is.
So,
thank you very much for having me on.
if you want to support The Ron Pertee Show, head over to anchor.fm/The Ron Pertee Show. Be sure to listen to all of our old episodes and hit that support button. Or you can head over to patreon.com/Ron Pertee if you feel like helping out on a monthly basis to keep the show afloat. Your support is how we stay afloat. So thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.